You're with Dr. Nita Chhinzer, and in this episode, we're discussing employee obligations when quitting. In Canada, quitting is legally recognized as voluntary resignation in which the employee terminates the employment relationship, often in the form of resignation letters, but there's also job abandonment and other ways in which the employee leaves the employer. Some of the factors include work-related factors, such as the employee dislikes the boss or feels that there's too much pressure or stress, or non-work-related factors, like they're returning to school or moving. Either way, employee quits are often most caused by low job satisfaction. When an employee quits, they may believe that they don't have any obligations to the employer. However, in Canada, employment-related legislation clearly identifies employer responsibilities at the time of involuntary turnover, but also employee responsibilities at the time of voluntary turnover. So that would be quitting. The jurisdiction-specific Employment or Labour Standards Act may provide information regarding the notice of voluntary turnover. For example, on the Ontario Employment Standards Act, employees with less than 2 years of employment with the same employer are required to provide at least 1 week of notice when quitting, while those with more than 2 years of employment with the same employer must provide at least 2 weeks of notice when quitting. In fact, the term wrongful resignation is used by some to refer to when an employee quits without giving notice to the employer. There's a lot known about wrongful dismissal and a little bit less known about wrongful resignation, so let's walk through this. Lawsuits by the employer for wrongful resignation are rare and often limited to fiduciary employees, so those are employees in positions of implicit trust. A key outcome of recent cases in which the employer was awarded damages from the employee who failed to provide notice in the courts have suggested that termination of employment is a decision that carries mutual obligation, and that the employee should give a reasonable amount of notice to allow the employer to find suitable replacement. Let's go through 4 examples. As a recent example, a doctor was recruited to work in rural Manitoba for 10 years and given an employment incentive of a $100,000 interest-free loan as part of that arrangement. The employee completed only 2 years of work and quit to move back to British Columbia due to family medical reasons. Initially, the employee did not repay the loan when she quit and was sued by her previous employer. They settled on payment in full before the court date. In this case, the incentive was tied to retention, and the employee was required to return the incentive. Other incentives like this include educational allowances and signing bonuses or moving expenses, which are covered by the employer and tied to a minimum term of employment. In 2020, a New Brunswick small claims court also ordered a veterinarian to pay for damages to her employer after she quit without providing 4 months of advance notice, and that notice period was actually in her employment contract. The clinic had established that it would be unable to provide services with no veterinarian, thus the requirement for such a long notice period was deemed valid. Then we have cases where employees not only quit, but they also lure away other customers or co-workers. The Supreme Court of Canada found a former branch manager at RBC Dominion Securities personally liable for almost $1.5 million in lost profit. In 2000, he organized a mass exodus of employees, none of whom gave reasonable notice, from RBC to Merrill Lynch. The Supreme Court found that all of the associated employees were liable for failure to give reasonable notice of termination, resulting in an additional $40,000 in damages. The Ontario Court of Appeals upheld an award for $20 million in damages against 4 employees. The 4 employees quit their jobs with only 2 weeks of notice, immediately began working with a competitor, and quickly solicited clients from their previous employers. How do organizations protect themselves? Clearly, in these cases, the organizations suffered losses due to the quitting of employees without proper notification. Having clear policies linking incentives to retention is something all employers should be doing. Second, the employer should make the policy known in all employee handbooks, contracts, and orientation. Third, the policy should be administered consistently throughout the organization. If you offer one person the opportunity to quit without having to abide by the policy, then the court system will find that your inconsistency is condoning policy violation. It's also important to remind employees when they quit about their obligation. The court system is a last resort measure for employers.